Hi, all my lovely viewers. You are listening the Alpa's King love story. In that story, you will enjoy a lot of thrilled, love, and more interesting ending. Before starting story, please subscribe my channel because your one like and subscribe means a lot to me. And after it, please share your thoughts on comments. And if you like the story, so share it with your circle as well. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unbroken Stallion. The morning mist clung to the cold stone courtyards of the Silvercrest Palace like a shroud. I pulled my threadbare cloak tighter around my shoulders, the chill seeping into my bones. Around me, the palace was stirring to life, guards changing shifts, servants scurrying with trays, and the distant clang from the blacksmith's forge. But my world began and ended at the royal stables. For 3 years, since my mother's final breath had left me alone and anchorless in a world that despised my mixed blood, these stables had been my refuge and my prison. Half wolf, half human, belonging to neither world, tolerated only for my willingness to work where others wouldn't. The angry shouts reached me before I even rounded the final corner. A crowd had gathered at the reinforced paddock, their murmurs a low, hostile hum. I pushed through, my heart sinking. In the center of the chaos stood Eclipse. Midnight Sovereign, they called him. The Alpha King's prized, unbroken black stallion. 17 hands of pure, trembling fury. His coat was the color of a starless night, soaking in the weak morning light. His eyes rolled white, showing the terrified whites, and his hooves struck the cobblestones with enough force to spark. 3 stable hands, grown men, full-blooded wolves, lay groaning against the fence, clutching broken ribs and bruised limbs. "Get back, you fools!" the stablemaster Gareth roared, his face purple with rage. "The beast is cursed!" Hi, all my lovely viewers. You are listening the Alpa's King love story. In that story, you will enjoy a lot of thrilled, love, and more interesting ending. Before starting story, please subscribe my channel because your one like and subscribe means a lot to me. And after it, please share your thoughts on comments. And if you like the story, so share it with your circle as well. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unbroken Stallion. The morning mist clung to the cold stone courtyards of the Silvercrest Palace like a shroud. I pulled my threadbare cloak tighter around my shoulders, the chill seeping into my bones. Around me, the palace was stirring to life, guards changing shifts, servants scurrying with trays, and the distant clang from the blacksmith's forge. But my world began and ended at the royal stables. For 3 years, since my mother's final breath had left me alone and anchorless in a world that despised my mixed blood, these stables had been my refuge and my prison. Half wolf, half human, belonging to neither world, tolerated only for my willingness to work where others wouldn't. The angry shouts reached me before I even rounded the final corner. A crowd had gathered at the reinforced paddock, their murmurs a low, hostile hum. I pushed through, my heart sinking. In the center of the chaos stood Eclipse. Midnight Sovereign, they called him. The Alpha King's prized, unbroken black stallion. 17 hands of pure, trembling fury. His coat was the color of a starless night, soaking in the weak morning light. His eyes rolled white, showing the terrified whites, and his hooves struck the cobblestones with enough force to spark. 3 stable hands, grown men, full-blooded wolves, lay groaning against the fence, clutching broken ribs and bruised limbs. "Get back, you fools!" the stablemaster Gareth roared, his face purple with rage. "The beast is cursed!" I saw it instantly. Not madness, not a demon spirit as the whispers claimed. Pain. It screamed from every tense line of the stallion's magnificent body. He held his left foreleg slightly off the ground, the barest hint of a flinch each time his weight shifted. "He's hurt," I said, my voice too quiet, swallowed by the crowd's noise. No one heard me. Duchess Ilara, resplendent in a riding habit of deep emerald velvet, stood apart from the common onlookers, her lips curved in a cool, dismissive smile. "Such a waste," she sighed to the beta at her side, a cruel-eyed man named Corvin. "A creature of such potential, ruined by a savage temperament. Perhaps it should be put down before it kills someone." Put down. The words ignited a spark in my chest. I stepped forward, my worn boots silent on the damp stone. "What are you doing, half-breed?" Gareth snarled, spotting me. "Get away! Your kind has caused enough trouble." I ignored him, my entire focus narrowed to the horse. His great head swung toward me, nostrils flaring, breath pluming in the cold air. The crowd gasped, shuffling backward. They expected another spectacle, another body to be dragged from the paddock. I saw only the fear in his dark, intelligent eyes, a fear born from relentless, misunderstood agony. "Silence!" The word was not shouted, yet it cracked through the courtyard like a whip, instantly stilling every voice. He stood at the archway, having arrived as silently as a shadow at dawn. Alpha King Kalen. The air itself seemed to thicken and bow under the weight of his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of weathered oak that fell to his collar. His face was all sharp angles and solemn authority, but it was his eyes that arrested me, a piercing storm cloud gray that saw everything. He moved through the parted crowd, his gaze sweeping over the scene before him, settling on me, a ragged stable girl frozen halfway to the paddock gate. "Explain this," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the hollow of my chest. Gareth scurried forward, bowing deeply. "My king, the stallion is in a rage again, injured 3 men. This servant was foolishly attempting to approach it. I was just removing her." Kalen's eyes never left mine. "Was that your intention, to approach him?" I found my voice, though it trembled. "To help him, your majesty. He is not raging, he is suffering. A stone bruise deep in his left forehoof, and the bit, someone has used a bit that has torn his mouth. His pain makes him defensive." A scoff came from Duchess Ilara. "A pretty story from a girl who mucks stalls. She seeks attention, my king, nothing more." Kalen ignored her. He studied Eclipse, who had gone preternaturally still at the sound of his master's voice, though his sides still heaved. "No one has been able to get near him for a fortnight, not the grooms, not the healers. Why do you believe you can come?" I met his stormy gaze, a feat that took every ounce of my courage. "Because I am not trying to conquer him, your majesty. I am trying to listen to him." A beat of silence stretched, taut and heavy. The entire courtyard held its breath. "Open the gate," Kalen said. Gareth sputtered. "My king, surely you cannot—" "Open it." The iron gate swung with a creak of protest. The crowd murmured, a mix of fear and morbid anticipation. This was it. I would be trampled, and they would have a story to tell for years. Every instinct screamed to run, but the memory of my mother's soft voice echoed in my heart. "True strength, Lyra, lies in compassion. Even the wildest heart can sense a gentle hand." I stepped into the paddock. The world shrunk to the space between me and Eclipse. The cold air, the smell of terrified horse and damp earth, the pounding of my own heart. He pinned his ears back, a warning rumble vibrating in his chest. I stopped, not advancing, not retreating. I simply stood, making myself small, unthreatening. Then I began to hum. It was an old, wordless melody my human mother had sung to me as a child, a lullaby of windswept hills and quiet streams. The notes were unsteady, barely audible, but I poured every ounce of calm I didn't feel into them. Eclipse's ears twitched, the dangerous rumble faded. He took a stiff step back, then another, watching me with wary, pain-glazed eyes. I took one slow, deliberate step forward, then another. "Easy, Great One. I see you're hurt. I know you are afraid. Let me help you carry the burden." I was an arm's length away now. I could feel the heat radiating from his powerful body, see the fine tremor in his muscles. I extended my hand, palm up, fingers relaxed, not to touch, but to offer. His muzzle, soft as crushed velvet, brushed against my skin. The contact was so gentle, so tentative, that a lump formed in my throat. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. I didn't grab or pet. I let him scent me, let him decide. His breath, warm and haze-sweet, washed over my wrist. Slowly, the great head lowered, until his forehead hovered just before mine. I closed my eyes and breathed with him, sharing the same air, the same moment of fragile peace. When I opened my eyes, the wild terror in his had softened to a profound, weary trust. I moved slowly to his side, my hand trailing along his neck, feeling the tension slowly uncoil. When I reached his leg, I crouched. "May I?" I whispered. For a heart-stopping moment, he shifted. Then, with a soft snort, he lifted his injured hoof and placed it, heavy and trusting, in my lap. The courtyard was utterly silent. My fingers found the problem immediately. A sharp, flinty stone wedged cruelly deep, the flesh around it hot and swollen. "I need a hoof click and warm water," I called, my voice steady now. "And which hazel salve?" This time, there was no hesitation. The items were passed to me with trembling hands. I worked with careful precision, speaking to Eclipse in a soft, constant stream. When the stone finally came free, a shudder of pure relief went through him. I cleaned the wound, applied the salve, and stood. Eclipse turned, and before I could react, he bowed his massive head and nudged my shoulder with his nose, a gesture of thanks that was unmistakable. The spell broke. A smattering of applause began, growing into genuine, amazed clapping. I looked up, dazed, to find Alpha King Kalen standing just inside the paddock gate. He was looking at me with an expression I could not decipher, a storm of curiosity, wonder, and something darker, more intense. He walked toward us, and Eclipse, the demon stallion, merely flicked an ear in his direction. Kalen placed a hand on the horse's neck, his gaze never leaving my face. 3 days, he said, his voice meant only for my ears. The best healers in the kingdom could not do what you just did in 3 minutes. How? The simplicity of the truth was all I had. "I listened, Your Majesty. When an animal is in pain, it speaks in the only language it has. Everyone else was too busy shouting to hear his." Something shifted in his storm-gray eyes, a crack in the kingly facade. "What is your name?" "Lyra, Your Majesty. Lyra Ashwood." "Lyra," he repeated, and my name on his tongue felt like a secret. "From this moment, you are Eclipse's sole handler. You will have quarters in the East Wing and a stipend triple your current wages. You answer directly to me." The world tilted. Quarters in the East Wing? Directly to the king? This was not a promotion. It was a seismic shift in the order of my universe. "Your Majesty, this is preposterous." Duchess Alara had stormed forward, her beautiful face tight with outrage. "She is a half-breed servant. You cannot possibly elevate her so. The scandal." "I am the king," Kalen interrupted, his voice dropping to a tone of such lethal quiet that even the Duchess flinched.
What I decree is law. And I suggest you remember, Duchess, that questioning my judgment in front of my pack is its own form of scandal. The silence that followed was colder than the morning mist. Alara's cheeks flushed a mottled red. She shot me a look of pure, undiluted venom before spinning on her heel and marching away, her entourage scrambling after her. The King Kalen turned back to me. Steward Aaron will see you settled. Rest today. Tomorrow you will give me a full assessment of every horse in the royal stable. I want to know which of my people have been shouting, as you put it. He left then, his departure as commanding as his arrival. I was left standing in the paddock, the scent of horse and salve in my nose, the phantom warmth of Eclipse's trust on my shoulder, and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that my invisible life was over. Patrice, the head housekeeper, found me there still, staring into nothing. Her kind, wrinkled face was grim. Come along, girl, let's get you to your new rooms before the wolves start to circle in earnest. Wolves? I whispered, my voice hoarse. She linked her arm with mine, leading me away from the staring crowd. You just caught the Alpha King's eye, child. In a world ruled by bloodlines and power, a half-breed who does the impossible is not a curiosity. She is a threat, and threats have a way of being eliminated. As she led me through the labyrinthine halls to the opulent, lonely East Wing, her warning echoed in my mind. I walked into the paddock to save a horse. But what new more dangerous paddock had I just stepped into? And what unseen stones were already waiting, wedged and ready to cause agony? The king's stallion had bowed, but the court, I feared, was just preparing to bare its teeth. Chapter 2: Whispers in the East Wing. The room in the East Wing was a world away from the cramped, drafty servants' quarters. A real bed with a thick mattress and clean linens, a woven rug on stone floors, a small writing desk held paper, ink, and a stub of candle. It was more space and privacy than I had ever possessed. It felt like a gilded cage. Patrice left me with a bundle of new clothes, simple, well-made tunics and trousers of durable cloth, and a single fine woolen dress of deep blue. For if you're summoned, she'd said briskly, but her eyes were kind. Keep to yourself, Lyra. Do your work, and be wary of gifts that come with no named price. Her words haunted me as I paced the small room. The price of this promotion was already becoming clear. The hostile stares in the courtyard, Duchess Alara's venom, the Beta Corvin's cold assessment. I was an anomaly, a flaw in the perfect tapestry of pure-blooded wolf hierarchy, and flaws were either removed or exploited. Sleep was a distant shore I could not reach. The events of the day played behind my eyes on a relentless loop. The terror in Eclipse's eyes, the feel of the stone coming free, the intensity of King Kalen's gaze. That gaze, it had seen past the worn clothes and the half-breed stigma. It had seen me, and that was more terrifying than any threat from the court. When the palace bells tolled the midnight hour, I gave up. Slipping into my old cloak, I crept from my room. The corridors of the East Wing were silent, lit by guttering sconces. I knew the back ways, the servant passages hidden behind tapestries and through pantries. I was a ghost again, slipping unseen toward the one place that felt like home. The stables at night were a cathedral of quiet sounds. The soft crunch of horses chewing hay, the rustle of straw, the occasional snort or sigh. The air was warm and thick with the comforting smells of leather, grain, and animal. Eclipse whickered softly as I approached his stall. In the moonlight filtering through the high windows, He looked like a creature carved from shadow and silver. I slipped inside, not bothering with a light, and leaned against his solid warmth. "I don't know what I'm doing," I confessed to him, my voice a whisper in the dark. "They'll destroy me for this, for stepping out of my place." He rested his heavy head on my shoulder, as if offering his strength. I closed my eyes, drawing comfort from his silent solidarity. A floorboard creaked. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Eclipse's head came up, ears pricked toward the stall door. So, the little miracle worker communes with her beast in the dark. Beta Corvin stepped into the sliver of moonlight at the entrance to the stall. He was not dressed for bed, but in a formal tunic, his expression one of cold amusement. A fitting scene, the half-breed and the demon sharing secrets. I straightened, trying to still the trembling in my hands. "I was checking on my charge, Beta Corvin. Is that a crime?" "Your charge," he sneered, taking a step closer. Eclipse shifted, a warning rumble building in his chest. Corvin eyed the horse warily, but didn't retreat. "You have been given a title you have not earned, a position you do not deserve, and the attention of a king who is too noble to see your manipulation for what it is." "I manipulated no one. I helped an animal in pain." "You performed a trick," he hissed, his voice dropping, "a clever bit of theater to elevate yourself from the filth. But your kind always reveals itself, Ashwood. You will make a mistake. You will overreach. And when you do, I will be there to ensure you fall back to the mud where you belong." His words were like shards of ice, intended to wound and intimidate, and they did. But beneath the fear, a spark of defiance ignited. "Is that a threat, Beta? Should I report your concern to the king?" His face darkened. He moved with wolfish speed, not toward me, but to snatch a heavy metal hook used for hanging tack from the wall. He brandished it not at me, but at Eclipse. "Perhaps the demon has a relapse. Perhaps it attacks its new handler. Tragic, but these things happen with beasts." Horror lanced through me. "Don't you dare!" He raised the hook. Eclipse reared with a scream of fury, his hooves slashing the air where Corvin had been a moment before. The Beta had leaped back, a cruel smile on his face. "See? Unpredictable. Dangerous. Just like you." "Guards!" The shout was not mine. It came from the stable entrance. A figure stood there, holding a lantern aloft. Steward Aaron, his usually placid face tight with anger. "Guards, to the royal stable!" Corvin dropped the hook with a clatter, his smirk vanishing. "This is not what it appears, steward. The horse was agitated. I was attempting to subdue it for the girl's safety." "I saw what you attempted, Beta Corvin. I suggest you retire for the night. I will be making a report to the king at first light." For a long moment, Corvin and the steward stared each other down. The air crackled with tension. Finally, Corvin gave a curt, furious nod. "As you wish. But remember your place as well, steward. Some shadows are deeper than others." His eyes cut to me, promising retribution, before he melted into the darkness of the stable aisle. My legs gave way. I slumped against Eclipse's side, trembling uncontrollably. Aaron hurried forward, his lantern casting swinging shadows. "Are you injured, child?" I shook my head, unable to speak. He sighed, a sound of deep weariness. "Come, you cannot stay here. I will have a guard posted at Eclipse's stall tonight. You will return to your quarters." "He'll try again," I whispered. "Undoubtedly," Aaron agreed, helping me to my feet. "Which is why you must be smarter and stronger than he is. The king has shown you favor. That is a shield. But it is also a target. You must learn to carry both." He escorted me back through the silent palace, his lantern a tiny island of light in a sea of hostile darkness. The encounter with Corvin had stripped away any illusion of safety. The king's protection was a theoretical wall. Corvin's hatred was a very real, very sharp dagger waiting in the dark. Back in my room, I barred the door. The luxurious space now felt like a trap, the window a potential entry point. I sat on the bed, arms mapped around me, watching the moon track across the sky. King Kaelin's order echoed in my mind, a full assessment of every horse. It was no longer just a task. It was my first stand, my proof that his faith was not misplaced, and perhaps my only way to find allies in this den of wolves. As dawn tinged the sky with pale gray, I made a resolution. I would do my work. I would be impeccable. I would find the truth in the stables, not just about the horses, but about the people who cared for them, or failed to. Corvin had tried to frighten me back into the shadows, but I had spent a lifetime in shadows. It was time to step into the light, no matter how many knives it revealed. Chapter 3. The King's Request. The royal stables housed 47 horses, from sleek, nervous coursers bred for speed to patient, powerful draft horses that pulled the royal carriages. For the next 5 days, I lived among them. I arrived before dawn and left long after dusk, my world reduced to the feel of hooves, the sound of breathing, the language of twitches and sighs. I found my rhythm. The grooms and stable hands, initially wary or hostile toward me, the half-breed who had risen so suddenly, began to soften as they saw me work. I didn't order them, I asked. I didn't judge their past care, I showed them better ways. I treated a mare's stubborn cough with a steam of eucalyptus. I reshod a gelding whose lameness had been misdiagnosed. I spent hours gentling a young filly who had been broken with fear instead of patience. I kept a meticulous journal, not just of ailments and treatments, but of observations. Which groom handled the bit with rough hands? Which one always skipped the evening hoof check? Which one took the time to speak gently to the old blind pony in the end stall? I also found more stones, not just physical ones. A pattern of neglect, of shortcuts, of a few cruel hands hiding among the merely indifferent. The head groom, a man named Roderick, watched me with a constant simmering resentment. He had been bypassed, his authority undermined by my direct mandate from the king. He was Corvin's man, I soon realized. His ears were always listening, his eyes always reporting.
On the 6th day, as I was wrapping the leg of a hunter with a strained tendon, Steward Aaron appeared. "The king requests your presence in the sun parlor, Lyra. He wishes to review your assessment." My heart performed a clumsy somersault. I wiped my hands on my trousers, suddenly acutely aware of my simple clothes, the stray pieces of straw in my braid, the scent of horse and hay that clung to me. "Now?" "Now," Aaron confirmed, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "Do not be nervous. Present your facts. The king values truth above pretty presentations." The sun parlor was a small, bright room on the palace's southern side, its windows overlooking the training grounds. King Kaelin stood at one window, his back to me, watching a squad of guards drill. He wore a dark gray tunic, simple but impeccably tailored, his hair tied back. He seemed both immense and somehow solitary.
a mountain peak wrapped in quiet. "Your Majesty," I said, bowing my head. He turned. The morning light caught the planes of his face, softening the sternness. "Lyra, thank you for coming. I understand you have been diligent in your task." He gestured to a table where tea and a plate of small cakes had been laid. "Join me." Sitting at a table with the Alpha King felt more surreal than facing down Eclipse. I perched on the edge of a velvet-upholstered chair, my journal clutched like a shield. "Your report, if you please." I took a steadying breath and opened the journal. I spoke of Eclipse's full recovery, of the mare's cough, the gelding's corrected lameness. I detailed my recommendations for feed schedules, for grooming routines, for a new, more kind method of training the young horses. He listened intently, asking precise, intelligent questions. He knew horses, I realized, not just as possessions, but as creatures. His insights were sharp, his understanding deep. Then I reached the more difficult part. "There are also personnel observations, Your Majesty." His gray eyes sharpened. "Go on." "Grooms Thomas and Evander are consistently gentle and attentive. The horses trust them. Groom Alaric is heavy-handed with the bit. Several mouths show irritation. He should be reassigned to non-riding duties." I paused, my throat tight. "And headgroom Roderick, he turns a blind eye to these issues. He also authorized the use of a harsh, serrated bit on Eclipse, which caused the mouth sores I mentioned. He claims it was necessary for control, but it was cruelty disguised as discipline." Kalen finished, his voice dangerously quiet. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Continue." I told him of the missed hoof checks, the skipped evening feeds for the horses not slated for use the next day, the general atmosphere of fear some of the younger stable hands had around Roderick. I believe he is more concerned with appearing in control than with the animal's welfare, and he is close with Beta Corvin. The last part hung in the air. I had crossed a line, implying a political connection. I braced for dismissal, for anger. Kalen leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Beta Corvin has many friends in the palace. He believes tradition is the ultimate authority, and that innovation, or compassion, is a sign of weakness." He studied me. "You have made enemies quickly, Lyra Ashwood."
"We have a pact, Your Majesty." As I left the sun parlor, the journal under my arm and the memory of his hand clasping mine burning on my skin, I felt the walls of my world expand yet again. The paddock had been the first test, the stables the second. Now the king himself had handed me the reins to a challenge that would define not just my future, but potentially the perception of his reign. And somewhere in the shadows, Beta Corvin and Duchess Alara were waiting, hoping desperately for me to fail. The game was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that a gentle hand could be stronger than a clenched fist. The real training was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Language of Trust. The following dawn found me in Eclipse's stall, not with a saddle or a bridle, but with a soft brush and an apple. The colossal stallion greeted me with a soft nicker, his dark eyes intelligent and calm. He nudged my shoulder, searching for the treat. "Patience, my friend," I murmured, offering the apple. "We have new work ahead. Difficult work." For the first week, I did not even bring a saddle into the stall. My task was not to break his spirit, but to expand his world. I spent hours simply being with him,
brushing his coat until it shone like polished obsidian, talking to him about everything and nothing. I introduced new sensations slowly, a blanket draped over his back, the jingle of a bridle from a distance, the feel of a girth being gently tightened and loosened without any pressure. I worked on the principle my mother had taught me. Trust is built in quiet moments. Courage is asked for in small increments. Each day I asked for a little more. To stand calmly while I rubbed a sack of dried peas along his sides, simulating the rustle of a crowd. To accept a bit of honey on my fingers from a metal spoon, acclimating to the taste and feel of a bit. To walk beside me around the empty paddock with a light training surcingle around his barrel. He was wary, but willing. The pain that had made him vicious was gone, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Our communication was a silent dance of movement and breath, a flick of his ear, a tension in his shoulder, the soft blow of air through his nostrils. I learned to read them all. I was so absorbed in this delicate work that the rest of the palace, with its intrigues and hostilities, faded to a distant murmur. But it was never silent. One afternoon, as I was leading Eclipse on a long rein around the larger, deserted training field, a group of riders entered at the far end. Duchess Alara, resplendent on a white mare, flanked by Beta Corvin and several other high-born wolves. They trotted toward me, their horses' hooves throwing up clods of damp earth. I stopped, keeping Eclipse positioned sideways, a protective barrier between me and the approaching party. He tensed, sensing my sudden spike of anxiety. "Well, look here, Corvin," Alara called, her voice sweet as poisoned syrup. "The stable witch is attempting to perform another miracle. Tell me, girl, do you chant incantations as you work, or is it all just a clever trick of the hands?" "It is called patience, Your Grace," I said, keeping my voice level, my hand steady on Eclipse's neck. Corvin sneered. "Respect is due to one's betters, half-breed, not to animals. The king indulges this fantasy of yours, but we all know the truth. That beast is a liability. When it fails him at the equinox, as it inevitably will, your brief moment in the sun will end, and I will be there to ensure you are returned to the kennels where you belong." Eclipse stamped his hoof, his ears flattening against his skull. A low rumble echoed in his chest. He was reading my fear, my anger, and responding to the threat in Corvin's tone. "You are upsetting him," I said, struggling to keep the tremor from my voice. "Please, give us space." "Or what?" Alara laughed lightly. "Will you set your demon on us? That would certainly prove our point about its savage nature." I took a deep breath, forcing calm into my own body, pouring reassurance down the lead rope and through my touch. "Easy, great heart. They are nothing. Wind and noise." Eclipse's head lowered a fraction, the rumble subsiding to a wary snort. "He is not a demon," I said, looking directly at Alara. "He is a reflection. He shows kindness to those who offer it and defense to those who offer threat. You see in him what you choose to see." Her smile vanished, replaced by a glacial coldness. "You overstep, servant. Remember your place. No matter what title the king gives you, your blood is muddied. It always will be. Come, Corvin. The air here is starting to smell of cheap ambition and human frailty." They wheeled their horses and rode off, laughter trailing behind them. I stood rooted to the spot, shaking with a mix of fury and humiliation. Eclipse nudged me, his warm breath on my neck. I leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid, uncomplicated presence. "He'll never accept me," I whispered to him, "no matter what I do." But as I said it, I knew I couldn't stop. Not just because of my promise to the king, but because of the bond growing between this horse and me. It was a pure thing, untainted by bloodlines or politics. In a world determined to tell me I was less, Eclipse's trust was a silent, powerful argument that I was more. The next phase was the hardest. Wait. I started by leaning over his back, then gently laying my full weight across him. He sidestepped, confused, but didn't bolt. Day by day, I increased the time, talking to him constantly, brushing his coat until it shone like polished obsidian, offering praise. Then came the moment to swing a leg over. My heart hammered against my ribs as I gathered the reins, put my foot in the makeshift stirrup I had fashioned, and slowly lifted myself onto his back. He froze, every muscle locked. I could feel the powerful engine of his body quivering beneath me, a coiled spring. I didn't move. I didn't ask him to walk. I just sat, breathing deeply, letting him feel my weight, my balance, my lack of fear. I trust you, I thought, pouring this sentiment into every relaxed muscle, and you can trust me. After an eternity of suspended breath, he sighed, a great shuddering release of tension. He took a single, tentative step forward, then another. We walked a slow circle around the paddock, my world reduced to the rhythm of his gait and the overwhelming triumph in my heart. Word, of course, leaked out. The half-breed had ridden the unrideable. Whispers slithered through the palace corridors, growing and distorting with each telling. I was a witch. I had bespelled the horse. The king was bewitched. The air thickened with suspicion and envy.
King Kalen, to his credit, never interfered. He gave me the space I had asked for, but I felt his presence. Sometimes I would look up from my work to see him standing at a distant window of the palace, watching. Once I found a small, linen-wrapped parcel left on the fence post of the paddock. Inside was a jar of fine hoof oil and a note in a strong, slanted hand. For his kingly feet. K. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. He was watching, he approved, and he was waiting. 2 days before the equinox gathering, I knew it was time for the final test. I sought out Steward Aaron after the evening meal. I need to speak with the king. It's about Eclipse. He nodded, his expression grave. He is in his private study. I will take you. The king's private study was a room of deep wood and leather, smelling of old books, ink, and cedar. Maps were spread on a large table, and a fire crackled in the hearth. Kalen looked up from a sheaf of papers as I entered, his face shadowed with fatigue, but his eyes alert. Lyra, is something wrong? No, sire, but Eclipse is ready for his final test. Before you ride him at the gathering, he needs to experience you as his rider, not just me. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. You believe he will accept me? I believe he will accept a leader who approaches him with the same respect I have. But we must do it now, in private, so if there is an issue, we have time to address it before the public display. He stood, a decision made. Now then. The stable was quiet, lit by a few hanging lanterns. Eclipse was drowsy in his stall, but he came alert when he saw me, and then saw the king behind me, his ears pricked forward, his gaze wary, but not afraid. Wait here, I whispered to Kalen. I entered the stall, speaking softly to Eclipse, running my hands over him. A friend is coming to meet you, the one who provides your hay and your fields, the one I serve as you serve me. Be calm, great heart. I led Eclipse out into the wide aisle and nodded to Kalen. He approached slowly, not as a king, but as a man. He held out his hand, letting Eclipse scent him. The stallion sniffed, then nudged the offered hand. Kalen smiled a real, unguarded smile and scratched the horse's forehead. He's magnificent, Lyra. What you've done, it's nothing short of magical. It's just listening, I said softly. Now let him feel your weight. With my guidance, Kalen put his foot in the stirrup and mounted. Eclipse sidestepped, tense. I held his bridle, speaking in a low, steady stream. Kalen sat perfectly still,
a natural rider, his balance impeccable. After a moment, Eclipse settled, his ears flicking back to listen to the new weight on his back. "Ask him to walk," I said. Kalen shifted his weight subtly. Eclipse stepped forward, then again. They walked the length of the stable aisle, a picture of burgeoning partnership. I watched, my throat tight with an emotion I couldn't name. It was right, the powerful king and the once wild stallion moving together in the lantern light. After a few circuits, Kalen halted him and dismounted smoothly. He turned to me, his storm-gray eyes glowing with something fierce and bright. "He is ready, and so am I." "There is one more thing," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The crowds, the noise, the other horses, it will be overwhelming. I should be there, on the ground, beside him, at least for the start of the procession. He knows me. My presence will steady him." He considered this. "You would walk while I ride. That is not typical." "This is not a typical situation. My priority is the safety of both my king and my horse. This is the best way to ensure it." He looked from me to Eclipse, then nodded. "Agreed. You will walk at his shoulder, but Lyra—" He stepped closer, the firelight casting dancing shadows on his face. "This success, when it happens, will be yours. The court will see it. They will have to acknowledge it. Are you prepared for what comes after? The attention will not all be favorable." I met his gaze, feeling the weight of his question, the unspoken warning about the Elaras and Cormans of the world. "I am prepared to do my duty, Your Majesty. That is all." He reached out, as if to touch my arm, but stopped himself, his hand falling back to his side. "Then we are ready for the equinox." As he left the stable, I was left with the echo of his words and the warmth of the moment. We were ready for the challenge of the procession, but a cold knot of foreboding told me the real challenge would begin after the crowds had cheered and gone home. The challenge of surviving the victory. Chapter 5. The Equinox Gambit. The morning of the equinox dawned clear and cold, the sky a pale luminous blue. The Silvercrest Palace was a hive of controlled chaos. Banners in the royal colors of silver and midnight blue snapped in the breeze. The scent of roasting meat and baking bread wafted from the kitchens. From my window in the east wing, I could see carriages arriving in the courtyard below, disgorging packs of wolves from distant territories, all dressed in their finest furs and silks. My own finery was the deep blue wool dress Patrice had left me, my hair braided tightly back. I felt like an imposter, a stable hand dressed up for a masquerade. My stomach was a tight coil of nerves. Today, everything rested on the trust of one horse. The royal stables were even busier than the palace. Grooms rushed about, polishing tack, brushing coats to a high sheen. A sense of feverish excitement filled the air. Thomas, the new head groom, gave me a tense but encouraging nod. As I approached Eclipse's stall, the stallion was already groomed to perfection, his black coat like liquid darkness. He sensed the unusual energy, his eyes bright, his steps dancy. I spent a long moment with him, resting my forehead against his, breathing in his familiar scent. Today we show them all. You are not a demon. You are a king's heart, wild and loyal. Just be calm. I will be with you. I fitted him with the special bridle I had selected, a bitless design that used gentle pressure on the noseband. The saddle was the king's own, but I had padded it carefully. As I worked, I was aware of the stares. The other grooms, the visiting handlers, all watched the half-breed prepare the king's mount for the most public moment of the year. The air was thick with skepticism. A fanfare of trumpets split the air, the signal for the procession to assemble. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it.
I led Eclipse out into the main courtyard. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying.
Hundreds of people lined the route, crowding balconies, peering from windows. The allied alphas and their retinues stood on a raised dais at the far end. Sun glinted off jewels and weaponry. The noise was a solid wall of chatter, laughter, and music. Eclipse threw his head up, snorting. His body trembled. I held the bridle firmly, speaking to him in a low, constant murmur, my own fear locked away deep where he couldn't sense it. "You are safe. I am here. Look only at me." Then King Kalin appeared. He descended the palace steps, dressed not in warrior's leather, but in a formal tunic of silver gray embroidered with dark blue thread. A cloak of midnight fur draped over his shoulders. A simple silver circlet rested on his brow. He looked every inch the Alpha King, commanding, solemn, and impossibly regal. His eyes found mine across the crowded courtyard, and he gave the barest nod. He walked toward us, through a sea of bowed heads. The crowd's murmuring died to an anticipatory hush. All eyes were on the king and the legendary, cursed stallion. Kalin stopped before Eclipse. He didn't reach for the reins immediately. He placed a hand on the horse's neck, leaning close to speak words only the horse and I could hear. Eclipse, to my immense relief, lowered his head, accepting the king's touch. Then, with a fluid motion, Kalin mounted. Eclipse shifted, his ears flicking back, but he held his ground. The crowd released a collective held breath. Kalin looked down at me, his expression unreadable. "Walk with us, Lyra." I took my place at Eclipse's left shoulder, my hand on his bridle, and we moved forward. The procession began. Drums beat a slow, stately rhythm. We walked at the head of a column of mounted guards and nobles. The noise of the crowd swelled. Cheers, shouts, gasps. Flowers were thrown into our path. Eclipse's eyes rolled, but he kept walking, his gait steady. I kept talking, my voice a steady anchor in the storm of sensation. I was barely aware of the splendid scenes around me, of the faces blurring past. My entire universe was the horse beside me and the king on his back. As we passed the dais of alphas, I felt the weight of their scrutiny. Some looked impressed, others deeply skeptical. Duchess Ilara stood among them, her face a perfect, beautiful mask, but her eyes were chips of ice. Beta Corvin's expression was openly contemptuous. We completed the long circuit of the main thoroughfare and turned back toward the palace steps. The hardest part was over. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. We had done it! Then a child darted from the crowd, chasing a runaway hoop. It clattered and bounced directly under Eclipse's feet. The stallion reared. A scream tore from the crowd. Eclipse came down hard, his hooves striking stone where the child had been a moment before. Kalin held on, his seat secure, but the horse was spinning, panicked by the sudden movement and noise. The column behind us erupted into chaos as horses shied. "Eclipse, look at me!" I shouted, the command ripping from my throat with an authority I didn't know I possessed. I didn't grab for his reins. That could have caused him to rear again. I stepped directly into his line of sight, my hands up, my body blocking the chaotic crowd. "Be still!" My voice, sharp and clear, cut through his fear. He focused on me, his great body heaving. I held his gaze, pouring every ounce of calm command I could muster into my own stance. "I am your herd. I am your safety. Trust me." Slowly, trembling, he settled. His nostrils flared, but his feet planted firmly on the ground. The panic around us subsided into a stunned silence. Kalin, from his back, let out a slow breath. He looked down at me, and in his eyes I saw not alarm, but a blazing, fierce pride. He gave a slight pressure with his legs, and Eclipse, responding to his rider as much as to me, took a step forward, then another. We continued the final 50 yards to the palace steps as if nothing had happened, but the air had changed. The silence was no longer anticipatory. It was odd. At the base of the steps, Kalen dismounted. He didn't address the crowd immediately. He turned to Eclipse, stroking his sweat-damp neck with genuine affection. Then he turned to me. In front of the entire assembled kingdom and its guests, Alpha King Kalen placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head to me. It was a small gesture, but a profound one. A king acknowledging a subject not out of duty, but out of respect. "The kingdom thanks you, Lyra Ashwood," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet, "for your skill and for your courage." He then ascended the steps to give his formal address, but the moment belonged to the girl and the horse. As the cheers finally erupted, louder and more genuine than before, I stood with Eclipse, my legs weak, understanding dawning. The stumbling, the near disaster, it hadn't ruined the spectacle. It had perfected it. Anyone could ride a calm horse. Only a true partnership could survive a storm and emerge unbroken. We had shown more than control. We had shown unshakable trust. As I led Eclipse away toward the peace of his stall, I passed the dais. Duchess Alara's mask had finally slipped. Her beauty was twisted into something ugly and hateful. Beta Corvin's face was pale with fury. Their plan, their hope for a public failure, had not just been thwarted. It had been transformed into my greatest triumph. But as I met Alara's gaze for one frozen second, I saw the promise there. This was not over. Public victory had made me a hero to the people, but it had also made me a much more dangerous enemy to those in the shadows. The Equinox Gambit had been won, but the war in the palace corridors had just escalated. Chapter 6. A Web of Whispers. The aftermath of the equinox was a strange, suspended time. In the eyes of the common folk and many of the lower-ranking pack members, I was a minor celebrity. Whispers of the horse whisperer and the king's luck followed me through the courtyards. I received shy smiles from scullery maids and respectful nods from guards who had previously looked through me. But within the marble halls of power, the temperature had dropped to freezing. My victory was a direct insult to the old order championed by Beta Corvin and Duchess Alara. I had not only succeeded where they predicted failure, I had been honored by the king in front of the entire alliance. My humble origins were no longer a shame to be ignored. They were a banner of defiance, and it terrified them. I retreated to the stables, to the honest work of hoof and hay. Eclipse was calm, almost smug, as if he knew the stir he'd caused.
The other horses seemed to sense the shift in my status, responding to me with an even deeper calm, but the human world would not leave me in peace. 3 days after the procession, Steward Aaron found me mending a torn saddle blanket. "A summons, Lyra," he said, his voice grave. "The King's Council requests your presence." Ice trickled down my spine. The Council, the ruling body of the pack, made up of the heads of the oldest, most powerful families. Corvin sat on it. So did Alara's father, the Duke of Silverwood. For what purpose? To give your account of the equinox incident and to discuss the future of the royal stables, Aaron said. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They will try to trap you with words. Remember, you answered to the king alone. Be polite, be precise, and give no ground." The council chamber was a long, somber room, dominated by a massive oval table of dark oak. Tapestries depicting historic battles and treaties lined the walls. Sunlight streamed through high, narrow windows, illuminating motes of dust in the still air. 7 wolves sat around the table, their faces etched with varying degrees of curiosity, disdain, and boredom. King Kalen sat at the head, his expression carefully neutral, but his storm-gray eyes met mine for a heartbeat, imparting a silent strength. I stood at the foot of the table, feeling small and exposed in my simple dress.
The afternoon light from the window haloed him. They sought to cage you with a meaningless title and bureaucratic chains. Now you have a name, a standing. It will not stop their schemes, but it will make their attacks more difficult. They must now openly challenge a royal appointment. They will find a way, I said, the memory of Corvin's fury vivid in my mind. Undoubtedly. He stepped closer, and the room seemed to shrink, which is why you must be vigilant. Trust only those who have earned it. Patrice, Steward Aaron, Tomas and the stables. The rest, he shook his head. The court is a wablyra. You have just landed squarely in its center. Every strand will vibrate with your movement. Some will seek to entangle you. Others, his gaze held mine, will try to draw you in for the kill. His concern, the raw honesty in his warning sent a thrill through me that was entirely separate from fear. Why are you doing this? The question left my lips before I could stop it. Defying your counsel, elevating me so publicly, it costs you political capital for a stable hand? He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching my face as if looking for an answer written there. Because you see what others are blind to, he said finally, his voice low. You see the pain hidden behind fury. You see the potential buried under neglect. In a kingdom governed by old wolves who see only power and pedigree, that sight is priceless. And he added, almost to himself, it is a light in a very dark hall. The intimacy of the confession hung between us. I could feel my own heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In that moment, he wasn't the Alpha King. He was Kalen, a man who carried a heavy crown, who saw the same web of shadows I did, and who had just declared, in no uncertain terms, that he valued my place at his side. I will not let you down, I vowed, the words a solemn oath. I know, he said simply. Now go. Your horses await their equerry. As I left the palace, the new title sitting strangely on my shoulders, I felt the web tremble. I was no longer a spider's prey, scurrying in the shadows. I was another spider now, with a thread of my own. The thought was terrifying, and, for the first time, it was also filled with a fierce, defiant hope. They wanted a war of whispers? Let it begin. I had the trust of a king and the heart of a stallion. For now, it would have to be enough. Chapter 7. Poison in the Trough. The title of Royal Equerry changed everything, and nothing. My work in the stables remained the same, but now grooms jumped to follow my instructions without a hint of resentment. My meals were served in the hall with the lower nobility, where I endured polite, brittle conversation and stares that ranged from curious to contemptuous. I was given a set of rooms more suited to my new station, a small solar adjoining my bedroom with a writing desk and shelves for my growing collection of herbalism and farriery texts. The most significant change was the key I now carried. It unlocked the Royal Equine Archives, a dusty, scroll-crammed chamber adjacent to the library. Here were generations of breeding records, veterinary notes, and accounts of famous horses. It was a treasure trove of knowledge, and I began to spend my evenings there, cross-referencing treatments, studying bloodlines. It was in the archives, a week after the council meeting, that I found the first thread. I was researching treatments for recurring hoof abscesses, pulling scrolls from the time of Kalen's grandfather. As I unrolled a particularly brittle parchment, a smaller, newer slip of paper fluttered out. It was a list, written in a tight, efficient hand. Dates, horse names, and beside them amounts of silver coin. My blood ran cold. The horses listed were all young, healthy animals from prime bloodlines. The dates corresponded to sales recorded in the official ledger as being to allied packs, or private buyers. But the prices on this hidden list were a fraction of their recorded worth. Someone was stealing from the royal stables, not just horses, but the crown's wealth and genetic legacy. I carefully copied the list, my hand shaking. This was beyond petty cruelty or political maneuvering. This was treason. And the dates. They span the last 5 years, continuing into the present. The most recent entry was just 2 months old. Who had access to the archives? The seneschal's office oversaw household records. The stable master, before Roderick was dismissed, would have submitted breeding reports. And Beta Corvin, as head of the king's guard and logistics, had authority over all military acquisitions and sales. I needed to be certain. I needed to see the current ledgers held by the seneschal. Getting access was not simple. As equerry, I could request breeding records, but financial ledgers were outside my purview. I needed a reason. An opportunity presented itself a few days later when a lovely dapple gray mare from a prized lineage went mysteriously lame. The palace veterinarian, an elderly man set in his ways, diagnosed a strained tendon and prescribed rest. But the lameness was odd, shifting, not consistent with a tendon. A suspicion, dark and ugly, took root in my mind. I went to the king. "I believe the mare, Silverwind, may have been poisoned," I stated bluntly in his study. "The symptoms are not right. I need to review her feed logs, the purchase orders for her grain and supplements. To trace the source, I may need to see the broader stable expenditure ledgers." His face grew grim. Poison? In my stables? It is a suspicion, a weak poison, perhaps, enough to make her unsound, to lower her value, or to be a test. I did not voice my deeper fear, that this was connected to the thefts, a way to devalue an animal before it was sold off illegally. "You will have full access to any record you require," he said immediately. "I will inform Seneschal Vorlin you are acting on my direct order in a matter of security." Seneschal Vorlin was a thin, desiccated man with spectacles perched on his nose. He received the king's order with pinched lips, clearly displeased. His record room was a monument to meticulous order. He watched me like a hawk as I first examined the feed logs for Silverwind's stable. Nothing seemed amiss, the same supplier, the same amounts. But as I cross-referenced the delivery dates with the seneschal's master ledger, I saw a discrepancy. A shipment of oats, logged as delivered to the royal stables on the day Silverwind first showed symptoms, had been invoiced at a price significantly higher than the previous month's rate.
He hesitated, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Those are filed with the quarterly summaries. It would take time to retrieve." "I have time," I said sweetly. While he went to a back room, muttering, I quickly turned the pages of the heavy ledger. My eyes scanned for the horse names from my secret list. There. Bay Colt, Storm Chaser, sold to Lord Eric of the Western March, 500 silver. In the margin, in Vorlin's own hand, was a note. "See private contract." My heart hammered. The hidden list had shown a sale price of 150 silver for a horse named Storm Chaser. Vorlin returned with a single piece of paper, a bland notice of a market adjustment in oat prices, signed with an illegible scrawl. It felt fabricated. I thanked him, committing everything to memory. My investigation had just become infinitely more dangerous. I wasn't just facing cruelty or political opposition. I had stumbled upon a conspiracy of theft that likely involved the seneschal and possibly reached higher. Corvin's hatred of me took on a new, more sinister dimension. Was I a political irritant? Or was I getting too close to his secrets? I needed proof. Not a copied list, but something concrete. That night, under the cloak of a moonless sky, I slipped into the stables. Not to see Eclipse, but to visit the old blind pony in the end stall, a gentle creature named Pebble, who was overlooked by everyone. From my satchel, I took a small, empty leather pouch. Earlier, I had collected a few strands of hair from Silverwind's mane and a sample of her feed from the bin, scooping it from the bottom. I needed to test the feed.
the palace physician would not help me. He was Vorlin's brother-in-law. I needed an outsider. I knew of an old herb woman who lived in the forest beyond the palace walls, a human who sometimes traded remedies with the kitchen staff for supplies. She was said to be discreet and to have no love for the wolf nobility. It took 2 days to arrange an excuse to visit the outer market. With my new status, I could no longer slip out unnoticed. I took Thomas with me, citing a need for specific linseed oil for hoof treatment. In the bustling market, amidst the noise and smells, I separated from Thomas for a moment, claiming to look for honey. The herb woman's tent was a patchwork of faded fabrics at the very edge of the market. Her eyes, milky with cataracts, saw more than most. I showed her the pouch. "Can you tell if there is something in this grain that should not be there? Something that would cause a horse to become lame but not die?" She took the pouch, her gnarled fingers probing the contents. She smelled it, then took a single oat and crushed it between her fingers, tasting a minuscule amount with the tip of her tongue. She spat, her face wrinkling in distaste. "Wolf's bane," she croaked. "A tiny bit, not enough to kill a strong beast, just enough to twist the gut and weaken the legs. Nasty business. Who would do this?" "Someone who prefers shadows to light," I said, my fear crystallizing into cold certainty. I paid her with a silver coin from my new stipend. "Thank you. Please speak of this to no one." "Secrets are my trade, girl," she said, turning away. "But watch your back. Those who use poison rarely stop with animals." I returned to the palace, the proof a lead weight in my pocket. Silverwind had been deliberately poisoned. To what end? To discredit my care? To lower her value for a secret sale? It was a message and a test. That evening, as I checked on Eclipse, I found a new lock on the feed-room door, a heavy iron thing. Thomas stood nearby, looking uneasy. "Senestal's orders," he said quietly. "All feed stores are to be locked. Only the head groom and the Senestal's man have keys. For security." They were closing ranks, cutting off my access. The web was tightening. I had found a thread of poison, and now the spiders were scurrying to hide their nest. I had proof of a crime, but taking it to the king now would be a direct accusation against the Senestal, a high-ranking official. Without irrefutable evidence linking it to the thefts, it could be dismissed as an accident, or worse, framed as my own incompetence. Corvin and Vorlin would be ready for that. I needed the original document from the archives, the hidden list. It was the only thing that connected the financial theft to the stable. But if I took it, they would know someone had found it. I was trapped. To move was to risk everything. To stay silent was to let the poison spread. As I stood in the quiet stable, Eclipse nuzzled my hair, as if sensing my turmoil. I leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "They think they can box me in," I whispered to him, "with locks and titles and poison. But they don't understand. I've spent my life in a cage, and I know the silence of a stable at night better than they know the sound of their own lies." The game had changed. It was no longer about winning favor or proving my worth. It was about survival, and about exposing a rot at the heart of the palace. The poison was in the trough, and I was the only one who knew the antidote was truth. Chapter 8. The Sting of Truth. The locked feed room was a gauntlet thrown. It was no longer a subtle hint or a political maneuver. It was a blatant attempt to sabotage my ability to do my duty. The message was clear: know your place, and do not pry. But the poison in Silverwind's oats had shifted something fundamental within me. This was no longer about my pride or my position. Innocent creatures were being harmed. The king's trust and his treasury were being betrayed. I could not go to Kalen with half-proofs and suspicions. He had given me authority, and to run to him at the first sign of real danger would prove my enemies right, that I was not strong enough for the world I'd been thrust into. I had to find the original ledger slip, the hidden list. It was the only thing that connected the financial theft to the stable. But if I took it, they would know someone had found it. I was trapped. To move was to risk everything. To stay silent was to let the poison spread. My opportunity came with the first autumn storm. Rain lashed the palace walls, and wind howled through the battlements, keeping even the night guards huddled in sheltered posts, the perfect cloak for secrets. Dressed in dark, close-fitting clothes, I slipped from my room. I knew the palace's night rhythms, the changing of the guard, the sleepy maids finishing the last of the fires. The archives were in a quiet wing, guarded only by an elderly, dozing scholar who retired at desk. A heavy oak door and a simple lock were the only barriers.
My hands, more used to calming horses than picking locks, were steady. A thin, strong piece of wire, borrowed from the blacksmith's scrap pile, did the trick with a soft click that was swallowed by the storm's roar. The archives inside were pitch black and smelled of dust and old parchment. I lit a single, shuttered lantern, casting a tiny pool of light. I went straight to the section I had been studying. My fingers traced the spines of scrolls until I found the one that had coughed up its secret. Carefully, I pulled it from its shelf. I unrolled it on the table, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The smaller slip of paper was gone. A cold void opened in my stomach. They had found it. Or they had known it was there and removed it. I was too late. Despair threatened to choke me. I stood in the silent, dark room, the storm raging outside, feeling utterly defeated. Then a thought, stubborn and sharp, cut through the gloom. Vorlin was meticulous. He would not leave evidence lying loose in an archive. If he had planted it here, or if he knew of it, he would have filed it properly, in his own domain. The Seneschal's private office. It was a madness. Breaking into the record room was one thing, invading the Seneschal's personal office was an unpardonable crime. If I were caught, not even the king's favor could save me from banishment or worse. But the image of Silverwind's pained eyes, the feel of the poisoned grain in my palm, the stolen value of the king's horses, it hardened my resolve. I had to know. Vorlin's office was in the administrative wing, a place of ledgers and laws. The lock here was finer, more complex. Time stretched thin as I worked. Every creak of the wind-swept palace made me jump. Finally, with a slick sweat on my brow, the mechanism yielded. The office was obsessively ordered, neat stacks of parchment, quills aligned like soldiers, a seal and wax sitting precisely centered on a blotter. I went to the large locked cabinet behind his desk. This lock was the hardest yet, my fingers cramping with tension. Just as I thought I would have to give up, it clicked. Inside were folders, each labeled taxes, tithes, garrison supplies, and one unlabeled of fine calfskin. I pulled it out. My breath caught. Inside were copies of bills of sale, official ones with inflated prices, and clipped to them, like sad secret twins, were the real bills for fractions of the amount. The profits, the differences, were noted in a column, a running total that made my head spin. At the back of the folder was a list of codes and initials. One set of initials appeared again and again: C.V., Corvin, and Vorlin. Here was the proof, not just of theft, but of a conspiracy between the Beta and the Seneschal to systematically rob the crown. The horses were just one stream of their treachery. I had to take it. But if I took the whole folder, its absence would be discovered instantly. I needed to copy it.
Frantically, I laid out a blank piece of parchment from Vorlin's own supply. My hand flew, transcribing the most damning entries, the dual invoices for Storm Chaser and 2 other horses, the totals, the initials. I dared not take longer. The storm was easing, the palace would soon stir. I returned the folder to its exact place, relocked the cabinet, and erased all trace of my presence. Slipping back into the corridor, the copied pages a burning secret against my skin, I felt no triumph, only a deep, cold dread. I now held a truth that could shatter the palace, and powerful, desperate men would kill to keep it buried. Chapter 9. A King's Judgment. I did not sleep. At first light, dressed in my formal equerry attire, the copied pages sewn securely into the lining of my vest, I requested an urgent audience with the king. Steward Aaron, seeing the pallor of my face, asked no questions, merely nodded and led me to the king's private solar, where Kalen took his morning meal. He was alone, dressed for the day, reviewing dispatches. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes immediately narrowed, sensing the storm I carried within. Lyra, what has happened? No titles, just my name and a demand for truth. I sank to one knee, not in formality, but because my legs would no longer hold me. Your Majesty, I have uncovered evidence of treason within your household. The words fell into the quiet room like stones. He did not move. Speak. The story tumbled out. The hidden list, Silverwind's poisoning, the locked feed room, the false invoices, the conspirators' initials. I did not show him the papers yet. I wanted him to hear the truth before he saw the proof. As I spoke, his face transformed. The casual authority melted away, replaced by a glacial calm that was more terrifying than any outburst. When he finished, the silence was absolute. You broke into the seneschal's office. It was not a question. I did. To serve my king and the truth, the crime is mine to bear. He stood, walking to the window, his back to me. The morning sun lit the dust motes around him. He said, Corvin. The name was a curse. I knew he was ambitious. I knew he resisted change, but this is venality. It is a betrayal of every oath. He turned, his gray eyes blazing. And you risked everything to bring it to me? The horses had no voice, sire. I gave them one. For a long moment he just looked at me, and I saw not a king, but a man burdened by the ugliness of those he was forced to trust. Show me. I carefully unpicked the stitching and handed him the copied pages. He read them, his expression growing harder with each line. When he finished, he closed his eyes, and the decision was already made, cold and irrevocable. Aaron. The steward appeared instantly. Your Majesty. Summon Beta Corvin and Seneschal Vorlin to the throne room, now. Assemble the full council. No excuses, no delays. Sire. Aaron bowed and vanished. Kalen looked at me. You will come with me. You will present your evidence. This will not be pleasant. They will attack you, your methods, your blood. Are you prepared? The thought of facing Corvin's fury in front of the entire council made my blood run cold. But I had come too far. I am. The throne room was not the intimate council chamber. It was vast, built for ceremony and intimidation.
The high, vaulted ceilings seemed to swallow sound. The silver throne sat on a dais, flanked by banners. As Kaelan took his seat, the council members filed in, their faces a mix of confusion and irritation at the sudden summons. Duchess Alara was among them, her gaze sharp with suspicion. Finally, Beta Corvin and Seneschal Vorlin entered together. Corvin's expression was one of controlled annoyance. Vorlin looked pale, his eyes darting. You summoned us urgently, Your Majesty. Corvin's voice echoed in the hall. I did, Kaelan said,
his voice carrying without effort. "A grave matter has been brought to my attention, a matter of theft, fraud, and conspiracy against the crown." A ripple of shock went through the room. Corvin's face went carefully blank. Vorlin swayed slightly. "Royal Equerry Lyra Ashwood, present your findings." All eyes turned to me. I felt small, a single figure on the vast stone floor. But I felt the weight of the king's trust and the memory of poisoned oats, and I stood straight. I spoke clearly, recounting the sequence of events, from the hidden list to the invoices. I did not mention breaking into the office. I stated I had discovered the documents during my authorized review of equine records, which had led me to financial discrepancies I felt duty-bound to pursue. When I described the dual invoices and the initials, Vorlin let out a strangled gasp. "Lies! Forgeries! This half-breed seeks to destroy me out of malice for locking the feed room." Corvin was colder. "A fascinating story, woven from coincidence and the overactive imagination of an up-jumped servant. Where is this so-called evidence? Let us see these papers that she, by some miracle, alone discovered." Kaolin held up the pages I had given him. "The evidence is here, Corvin, in your hand and Vorlin's. The pattern is clear, and the total stolen would feed a village for a year. How do you answer?" Corvin's mask finally cracked. His eyes burned with hatred, first at the king, then at me. "I answer that you have been bewitched. You take the word of this creature over your loyal beta, over decades of service. This is how you reward loyalty? By listening to the whispers of a human-tainted witch who talks to horses?" His voice rose to a shout, echoing in the hall. "She is the poison in your court, not me. She clouds your judgment, makes you weak, makes you turn on your own." "Enough!" Kaolin's voice was a whip-crack of alpha power that physically silenced the room. He rose from his throne, a figure of terrifying authority. "Your loyalty was to your own coffers, Corvin. Your service was a lie. The evidence is undeniable. By the laws of this pack, theft from the Alpha is punishable by exile and the stripping of all title and property. Conspiracy to do so compounds the crime." He looked at Vorlin, who was weeping silently. "It was him," he wailed, pointing a trembling finger at Corvin. "He pressured me. He said it was for the good of the pack, to build a reserve of power free from the crown's oversight. He said the king was too soft, too distracted by new ideas. I only did as I was told." Corvin looked at his co-conspirator with utter contempt. "You sniveling worm." Kaolin's judgment was swift and final. "Beta Corvin, Seneschal Vorlin, you are hereby stripped of all rank, title, and property. You will be held in the dungeons until a convoy can be assembled. You are banished from these lands, never to return on pain of death. Your names will be struck from the rolls." Guards moved forward. Corvin did not resist, but as he was led away, he turned his head, and his eyes found mine. There was no fury left in them, only a promise, dark and absolute. This was not over. As the stunned council looked on, Duchess Alara's face was a perfect pale mask. Her ally was destroyed, humiliated, banished, and I had been the instrument. Kaolin addressed the room. "Let this be a lesson. Loyalty is not proven by bloodline or title, but by action. Integrity is not a weapon for advancement, but the foundation of this crown. The Royal Equerry has shown both at great personal risk. Her place here is earned, and it is secure." He dismissed them. The council filed out in a hushed, shocked silence. I stood alone before the dais, the enormity of what had just happened crashing down on me. Kaolin descended the steps until he stood before me. The formal mask was gone, replaced by a look of profound gratitude and a deep, weary sadness. You have done a great service today, Lyra, and you have made a powerful, lasting enemy in Corvin. He will not forget this. I know. He said, his voice softening. From this day, your guard will be doubled. You will not go anywhere alone. Is that clear? It was not a request. It was an order born of concern. I nodded. He reached out as if to touch my face, but again stopped, his hand curling into a fist at his side. The space between us hummed with unspoken words, with the shared weight of the secret we now carried and a connection forged in fire. He said, "Go and see to your horses. They are a simpler comfort." As I left the throne room, the eyes of the remaining guards held a new respect and a new wariness. I had brought down a beta. I had changed the balance of power in the palace. I was no longer just the horse whisperer. I was the king's justice. And in the echoing silence of the corridor, I knew Corvin's parting look was the truth. The battle in the shadows was won, but the war had just begun.
I threw myself into work. With Vorlon gone, the seneschal's duties fell to a committee until a replacement could be found. I was temporarily given oversight of the stable budgets, a task I approached with grim determination, determined to root out any last vestige of corruption. The locks came off the feed room. Silverwind recovered fully, her gentle nature returning as the poison left her system. Yet a deep unease settled in my bones. Corvin's final look haunted me. A man of such ambition, with allies still lurking in the shadows, would not simply fade away. Banishment was not death. It was exile, and exile bred hatred, and hatred plotted return. My only respite was my time with Eclipse and the king. Kaelin began to visit the stables more frequently, not as a monarch inspecting his property, but as a man seeking quiet. He would often find me in Eclipse's stall or in the tack room mixing a salve, and he would simply be there. Sometimes we talked about the horses, about a new breeding strategy I proposed, about the legends of great horses from the scrolls in the archives. Sometimes we worked in companionable silence, him brushing a horse's coat while I cleaned hooves. In these moments, the guards would wait outside, and the stifling formality of the palace would fall away. He was just Kaelin, a man with gentle hands and a thoughtful mind, who listened more than he spoke. And I was just Lyra, a woman who understood animals better than people. The unspoken bond between us, forged in the paddock and tempered in the throne room, grew stronger in these quiet exchanges. It was a connection that thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. He was the king. I was a half-breed with a dangerous gift. Whatever this was humming between us, it was a path fraught with thorns. One such afternoon, a week after the banishment, we stood in the courtyard watching Tomas put a young horse through its paces. The autumn sun was warm on our faces. "The council is pushing for a new beta," Kaelin said, his eyes following the horse. "They suggest Duke Silverwood." Alara's father, the man who had called my methods a human weakness, the thought sent a chill through me, despite the sun. "He is powerful," I said carefully, "and traditional." "Tradition that masks rot is not a foundation, it is a tomb," Kaelin replied, his voice low. "I will not have another Corvin, but the Duke has many supporters. Refusing him outright would cause a rift I cannot afford,
not with the northern borders tense. He was confiding in me, sharing the burdens of the crown. The intimacy of it stole my breath. "What will you do?" "I will delay. Propose a period of observation for several candidates. It will buy time." He turned to me, his gray eyes serious. "You have a keen mind for patterns, Lyra. Keep your eyes and ears open. In the stables, in the courtyards, the Duke's allies will be maneuvering. I would know their shape." He was asking me to be his eyes where his could not easily go, among the servants, the guards, the lower ranks. It was a spy's task, a dangerous, secret compact. "I will," I vowed. He nodded, a look of profound relief briefly crossing his features. "Thank you." He hesitated, then said, "The autumn hunt is in a fortnight. It is a major event. All the high nobility attend. I would have you ride at my side, on Eclipse." The world seemed to tilt. The autumn hunt was not a sedate procession. It was a wild, furious gallop across the royal forests, a display of raw speed and skill. Riding at the king's side was a position of supreme honor, traditionally reserved for the beta or a visiting alpha. For the Royal Equerry, a half-breed woman, to take that place, it would be a declaration far louder than any title. The Duke and his faction would see it as a profound insult, I whispered. "Let them," Kaelin said, a flash of his steel showing. "Let them see where my trust truly lies. Let them understand that merit, not just blood, has a place at my right hand. Will you do it?" He was not just asking me to ride. He was asking me to stand with him in the face of certain outrage, to be his partner in challenging the old order once more, to tie my fate to his, publicly and irrevocably. I looked at Eclipse, standing proud and calm in his paddock. I thought of the king's hand on the horse's neck, of our quiet conversations, of the weary loneliness I sometimes saw in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I will ride at your side." A smile, rare and brilliant, broke across his face. It was like the sun emerging from behind a storm cloud. In that moment, I would have agreed to ride into a den of real wolves. The peace of the afternoon was shattered by the arrival of a breathless messenger who skidded to a halt before the king. "Your Majesty, a rider from the North Reach. He comes under a flag of urgency." Kaelin's smile vanished, the king snapping back into place. "Bring him to the map room. I will come immediately." He glanced at me, the unspoken connection thrumming between us. "We will speak of the hunt later." As he strode away, Alistair falling into step behind him, I was left with the echo of his smile and the heavy weight of his new request. Keep your eyes and ears open. The quiet was over. The Duke's faction would be moving. Corvin, from wherever he was, would be plotting. And I had just agreed to place myself at the very center of the coming storm, on the back of a black stallion, beside a king who was starting to feel less like my sovereign and more like the other half of a dangerously fragile whole. The calm was a lie. The storm was gathering, and I was riding straight for its heart. Chapter 11. Shadows in the Forest. The messenger from the north brought news of skirmishes, rogue wolves, possibly encouraged by a rival alpha, testing the border patrols. It was not yet war, but it was a persistent, gnawing threat that demanded Kaelin's attention. Council meetings grew longer and more fraught. The push to appoint the Duke Silverwood as beta gained momentum under the banner of needing strong, traditional leadership in uncertain times. I became a shadow in my own right, moving through the palace with my silent guard, listening. In the stables, the groom's chatter was freer. I heard snippets, talk of the Duke's impressive kennels, of his son's prowess in training war dogs, of how the Duke believed the kingdom's strength lay in purity of line, in beasts and wolves alike. In the servants' hall, where I now took my meals at a small table apart, the whispers were different. Cooks muttered about the Duke's steward demanding the finest cuts of meat for his master's table, even when supplies were tight for the lower halls.
Laundry maids gossiped about the silverwood livery being mended with thread of poorer quality, suggesting coin was being pinched elsewhere. It was a portrait of a man who prized appearances over substance, who believed in a rigid hierarchy where those at the top took their due and those below were meant to serve silently. It was Corvin's philosophy, wrapped in a nobler title and a colder, more calculating mind. Meanwhile, I prepared for the hunt. Eclipse needed to become accustomed to the chaos of a hunt party, the baying of hounds, the shouts of riders, the sudden, explosive gallops. I began taking him out with the royal pack on their training runs, starting at a distance, then slowly moving closer. He was nervous at first, his herd instinct telling him the dogs were predators, but my calm presence and his inherent courage won out. Soon he was trotting steadily alongside the flowing river of hounds, his ears pricked with alert interest. My own preparation was less about riding and more about armor, not of steel, but of demeanor. Patrice helped me, her old eyes wise. "They will try to unhorse you before you even mount, girl," she said, adjusting the fit of a dark green riding habit she had tailored for me, with words, with looks, with accidental jostles. "You must be a statue. Show no anger, no fear, no pleasure. You are there by the king's command. Let that be your shield and your weapon." The day of the autumn hunt dawned crisp and clear, the air smelling of wood smoke and fallen leaves. The gathering point in the royal forest was a scene of controlled splendor. Lords and ladies in hunting leathers and furs sat atop restless horses. Hounds milled and yelped in excited packs. The air thrummed with anticipation and competitive energy. I arrived on Eclipse, my back straight, my face a calm mask as Patrice had instructed. My guard, Alistair, rode a steady gelding beside me, his presence a silent warning. A hush fell over sections of the crowd as we approached, followed by a surge of whispered commentary. I saw Duchess Alara, beautiful and cold, on a white mare, her eyes like chips of flint. Near the front stood Duke Silverwood, a tall, severe man with iron-gray hair, deep in conversation with a circle of other nobles. He glanced at me, his gaze sweeping over Eclipse and me with a dismissive scrutiny that felt like a physical blow. Then Kalen arrived, riding his seasoned hunter, Argent. He was dressed in dark leather and gray fur, the silver circlet on his brow. His presence commanded immediate silence and bowed heads. His eyes scanned the crowd and found me. He nodded, a slight, private gesture, then guided Argent to the head of the assembly. "My friends," his voice carried, "the autumn bounty awaits. Let the hunt be fair, the chase bold, and the fellowship strong." A cheer went up. Huntsmen sounded the horns, and the hounds were released, streaming into the forest with a joyful cacophony. The riders followed, a thunderous wave of horse and wolf. Kalen held back, letting the initial surge pass. He motioned for me to come alongside him. As I nudged Eclipse forward, I felt hundreds of eyes on my back. We moved into the dappled shadows of the forest, the sounds of the hunt ahead of us. For a time, there was only the rhythm of the ride,
the crunch of leaves under hoof, the distant cries of the hounds. Kaelin and I rode in easy silence, Alistair a discreet distance behind. It was, despite the circumstances, profoundly peaceful. "They are not happy," Kaelin said, after a while, a hint of amusement in his voice. "The Duke looked as though he had swallowed a wasp," I replied, and was rewarded with a quick, genuine laugh from him. The peace was shattered by a frantic series of horn blasts from ahead, not the long, clear note of a sighting, but short staccato blasts of alarm. Kaelin's head snapped up. Trouble! We urged our horses into a canter, following the sound. We burst into a small clearing to find a scene of chaos. A young lord's horse had fallen, throwing its rider, and was now thrashing on the ground, tangled in a mass of thorny underbrush and its own reins. The rider was clutching his arm, his face white. Other hunters had stopped, milling about uncertainly. The baying of the hounds was fading into the distance. The downed horse was screaming in pure terror, its eyes rolling wildly, its legs flailing dangerously. It was a recipe for disaster. The horse could break its own neck or injure someone trying to help. "Stand back!" I didn't wait for permission. I slid from Eclipse's back, handing his reins to Alistair. I approached the panicked animal, not looking at the nobles, my entire focus on the horse. "Easy, easy now," I crooned, moving slowly. The horse's thrashing slowed slightly as it focused on me. I could see the problem. A thick vine of bramble had wrapped around its foreleg and the rein, tightening with every movement. It wasn't seriously injured, just trapped and terrified. I needed to cut it free. I had a small knife at my belt for such purposes, but to get close enough, I had to risk those flailing hooves. "Lyra, be careful!" Kaelin's voice was sharp with concern. I dropped to my knees, making myself small, and began to crawl through the mud and thorns toward the horse's shoulder, talking in a low, steady stream. "Shh, I see it. You're caught. I'm here to help. Just be still, brave heart, just for a moment." My hand reached out, inches from a striking hoof. I touched his neck, then slowly, carefully sawed at the tough vine. The horse shuddered but held still, as if understanding. The final strand snapped. I grabbed the rein and pulled, disentangling it. "Up now," I said, rising and stepping back. "Up!" The horse, feeling the restriction gone, heaved itself to its feet. It stood, trembling and sweat-soaked, but sound. A collective sigh of relief went through the onlookers. I turned to the young lord who was being helped up by his friends. "He's fine, shaken, but not lame. Walk him home gently." The young man, pale and shocked, stammered his thanks. I became aware of the silence then, and turned. The entire party that had gathered was staring at me, not with disdain, but with a dazed kind of awe. I was mud-splattered, my clothes torn by thorns, my hands scratched. I had just crawled into danger to save a noble's horse, where others had hesitated. Duke Silverwood sat on his horse at the edge of the clearing, his expression unreadable. Duchess Alara's face was a mask of frustrated fury. Kaelin dismounted and came to my side. He didn't say a word. He simply took my scratched, muddy hand in his grip firm and warm. It was a gesture more powerful than any speech. He was telling them all, without uttering a sound, that this muddy, brave, half-breed woman was under his protection and in his favor.
The moment stretched, then broke as the huntmaster called that the hounds were drawing too far ahead. The party began to regroup, the excitement of the chase returning, though the atmosphere was now charged with a new electricity. As we remounted, Kaelin leaned close, his voice for my ears alone. "You see, You show them your true worth, not in a throne room, but in a clearing, not with words, but with action. We rode on, but the hunt was forgotten. The real quarry that day had been respect, and I had cornered a measure of it, not through title or birth, but through thorns and mud and steady hands. The shadows in the forest had tried to intimidate me, but in the face of simple, necessary courage, they had momentarily retreated. I had earned a sliver of ground, and I would need it, for the Duke's cold gaze promised the battle for that ground was far from over. Chapter 12. The Duke's Gambit. The incident in the clearing became legend before we even returned to the palace. By the time the hunt party straggled back in the late afternoon, the story had been embellished and repeated a dozen times over. I was no longer just the horse whisperer, I was the thorn tamer, the servant who'd crawled through brambles to save a prized mount. The young lord, whose arm was only sprained, sang my praises to anyone who would listen, his gratitude genuine. This public, unsolicited acclaim was a problem for Duke Silverwood. His strategy relied on painting me as an unnatural upstart, a corrupting influence. My act of unvarnished physical bravery was difficult to twist. It appealed to the wolfish value of courage and the universal appreciation for saving a valuable animal. I saw him watching me during the post-hunt feast in the Great Hall. I was seated, by the king's explicit order, at the high table, though at the far end. The Duke's gaze was analytical, like a general reassessing a patch of terrain. The blatant hatred was gone, replaced with something more calculating. He had underestimated me. He would not make that mistake again. His gambit came not with a shout, but with a polite, public request 3 days later. The council was in session, discussing the northern border tensions. I was not present, of course, but Steward Aaron brought me the news as I inspected a new shipment of hay. "The Duke has made a proposal to the king," Aaron said, his voice low. "He acknowledges your unique skills. He proposes a demonstration for the benefit of the entire pack to showcase the new methods of the Royal Equerry." A cold trickle of apprehension dripped down my spine. "What kind of demonstration?" "A horse," Aaron said, "not one of ours. The Duke has acquired a stallion from the far southern deserts, a breed unknown here. It is said to be utterly wild, impossible to break. He claims it is a test of spirit, to see if your methods work on a creature with no reference for our ways. He offers it as a gift to the crown if you can gentle it within a fortnight." It was a trap, elegantly baited. Refuse, and I would be called a fraud, my skills limited to familiar horses. Accept, and I would likely fail with a creature whose language I did not know, in front of the entire pack. And if the horse was as wild as claimed, the risk of serious injury to me or bystanders was high. The king's response? "He could not refuse without appearing to lack faith in you," Aaron said grimly. "He has accepted. The demonstration is set for the full moon in the main courtyard. The Duke's horse arrives tomorrow." The weight of it settled on me, heavy and smothering. I had 2 weeks to learn an alien tongue, to build trust with a creature born of sun and sand, brought here in fear and anger, and I had to do it under the gloating eyes of my enemy. The southern stallion arrived at dusk. He was smaller than our northern breeds, but built of whipcord muscle and fire. His coat was the color of sun-bleached gold, his mane and tail like spun white flax. But his demeanor was marred by his demeanor. He came off the transport wagon like a coiled spring, his hooves striking sparks from the cobbles, his eyes showing a wide crescent of white. He screamed his defiance, a sound that was more like an eagle's cry than a horse's whinny. They had named him Simoom, the poisonous desert wind. He was housed in the strongest, most isolated stall, with double latches. The grooms gave him a wide berth. Even Eclipse in his paddock grew still and watchful, sensing the raw, untamed fury of the newcomer. I approached the stall that night, alone save for Alistair's distant, watchful presence. Simoom stood at the back, pressed against the wall, every line of his body screaming prey. He was not angry, he was terrified, transported across unknown lands, surrounded by strange smells and sounds and the scent of predator wolves. His wildness was a shield. I did not try to enter. I sat on a bale of hay just outside the stall, with my back against the wall. I began to hum my mother's old melody, the one that had calmed Eclipse. I hummed it for an hour until my voice grew hoarse, not looking at him, not demanding anything. I was just a quiet, non-threatening sound in his new, terrifying world. On the second day, I brought a bucket of fresh water and a handful of sweet dates, a fruit I'd learned was common in the south. I left them just inside the stall door and retreated. He ignored them for hours, but by nightfall, the dates were gone. This was our dance. I spent hours each day just being present, singing, sometimes speaking softly of nothing. I offered food and water, never forcing proximity. I studied what little I could find about desert horses, their stamina, their sensitivity, their social structure based on deep familial bonds. A solitary stallion like this was an outlier, likely driven from his herd. He was alone in every sense. After 5 days, he would take dates from my open palm if I held it perfectly still just inside the door, snatching them with lightning speed before retreating. After 7 days, he would let me sit inside the stall, as long as I remained by the door and didn't look directly at him. The palace, meanwhile, buzzed with speculation. The Duke and his faction made a show of confident anticipation, placing wagers in the guardroom on how quickly I would fail or be injured. Duchess Alara took to walking near the isolated stall with her friends, making loud, pitying comments about the poor, savage creature and the hopeless task. Kalen visited me each evening after council meetings. He never asked for progress reports. He would simply find me, often exhausted and covered in dust from sitting in the straw, and hand me a cup of warmed cider or a meat pie from the kitchens. We would sit in silence for a while, the shared understanding of the pressure a comfort in itself.
"He watches you," Kalen said one night, as we observed Simoom from a distance. The stallion was finally eating hay from a rack, though he still jumped at every sound. Not with fear of you, but with calculation. He is learning you as you are learning him. "I think I am a predator who brings food," I said, weariness leeching my voice. "I need him to see me as a herd, and I only have 7 days left to teach him." On the 10th day, the breakthrough came. I was singing, my voice scratchy with fatigue. I had my eyes closed, leaning against the stall wall. A soft, warm puff of air stirred my hair. I froze. Simoom's golden head was right beside mine. He was sniffing me, his nostrils flaring gently. He had come to me. I didn't move, didn't open my eyes. I just kept humming, letting him investigate. His muzzle touched my shoulder, then my neck. It was the barest brush, like a butterfly's wing. Then he rested his chin on the top of my head, his weight a gentle, profound pressure, a desert horse's gesture of trust, of acceptance into the space of another. Tears pricked behind my closed eyelids. He had decided. I was not a threat. I was safe. From that moment, everything changed. He allowed me to touch him, to brush the dust from his coat, to pick up his feet. He followed me around the small paddock I now exercised him in, no longer a flight risk, but a curious companion. He was not broken. He was not even gentled in the traditional sense. He was connected. The day of the full moon arrived. The main courtyard was packed. Torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The entire court was there, along with what seemed like half the pack. A sense of carnival anticipation hung in the air. They had come for a spectacle, expecting either a miraculous triumph or a humiliating disaster. Duke Silverwood stood front and center, a satisfied smile on his lips. Duchess Alara beside him, looking like a cat presented with a bowl of cream. Kalen sat on a raised dais, his face impassive, but I saw the tension in his clenched jaw. Samum was led into the courtyard by two very nervous grooms. He was breathtaking in the torchlight, his golden coat gleaming, his white mane like a banner. He was alert, his ears swiveling at the noise, but he did not panic. His eyes scanned the crowd, then found me. He let out a soft, questioning nicker. I walked to the center of the space, dressed in simple trousers and tunic. I carried no whip, not crop, not even a lead rope. I stopped a few paces from him and held out my hand. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath. The Duke's smile widened. Then Samum stepped forward. He lowered his magnificent head and pressed his forehead against my outstretched palm. The gesture was so like Eclipse's, yet uniquely his own. A desert horse's gesture of trust, of acceptance into the space of another. A murmur, then a swell of astonished sound rippled through the courtyard. I turned and began to walk a slow circle. Samum followed at my shoulder, his gait relaxed, his attention on me, not the hundreds of staring eyes. We walked one circuit, then another. I asked nothing more of him. The demonstration was not about domination, but about voluntary partnership, and he was giving it freely. The silence from the Duke's faction was deafening. I caught a glimpse of Ilara's face, pale with shock and fury. The Duke's smile had vanished, replaced with a stony, furious mask. His gambit had failed spectacularly. He had meant to provide a beast that would expose me. Instead, he had given me a platform to showcase the very heart of my philosophy, and in doing so, had made me a legend. I stopped before the dais and bowed to the king. Samum stood quietly beside me, a golden statue of calm. Kalen rose. The look he gave me was not one of royal approval, but of pure, unguarded wonder.
"He watches you," Kalen said one night, as we observed Samum from a distance. The stallion was finally eating hay from a rack, though he still jumped at every sound. Not with fear of you, but with calculation. He is learning you, as you are learning him. "I think I am a predator who brings food," I said, weariness leeching my voice. "I need him to see me as a herd, and I only have 7 days left to teach him." On the 10th day, the breakthrough came. I was singing, my voice scratchy with fatigue. I had my eyes closed, leaning against the stall wall. A soft, warm puff of air stirred my hair. I froze. Samum's golden head was right beside mine. He was sniffing me, his nostrils flaring gently. He had come to me. I didn't move, didn't open my eyes. I just kept humming, letting him investigate. His muzzle touched my shoulder, then my neck. It was the barest brush, like a butterfly's wing. Then he rested his chin on the top of my head, his weight a gentle, profound pressure, a desert horse's gesture of trust, of acceptance into the space of another. Tears pricked behind my closed eyelids. He had decided. I was not a threat. I was safe. From that moment, everything changed. He allowed me to touch him, to brush the dust from his coat, to pick up his feet. He followed me around the small paddock I now exercised him in, no longer a flight risk, but a curious companion. He was not broken. He was not even gentled in the traditional sense. He was connected. The day of the full moon arrived. The main courtyard was packed. Torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The entire court was there, along with what seemed like half the pack. A sense of carnival anticipation hung in the air. They had come for a spectacle, expecting either a miraculous triumph or a humiliating disaster. Duke Silverwood stood front and center, a satisfied smile on his lips. Duchess Ilara beside him, looking like a cat presented with a bowl of cream. Kalen sat on a raised dais, his face impassive, but I saw the tension in his clenched jaw. Samum was led into the courtyard by two very nervous grooms. He was breathtaking in the torchlight, his golden coat gleaming, his white mane like a banner. He was alert, his ears swiveling at the noise.
But he did not panic. His eyes scanned the crowd, then found me. He let out a soft, questioning nicker. I walked to the center of the space, dressed in simple trousers and tunic. I carried no whip, not crop, not even a lead rope. I stopped a few paces from him and held out my hand. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath. The Duke's smile widened. Then Samum stepped forward. He lowered his magnificent head and pressed his forehead against my outstretched palm. The gesture was so like Eclipse's, yet uniquely his own. A desert horse's gesture of trust, of acceptance into the space of another. A murmur, then a swell of astonished sound rippled through the courtyard. I turned and began to walk a slow circle. Samum followed at my shoulder, his gait relaxed, his attention on me, not the hundreds of staring eyes. We walked one circuit, then another. I asked nothing more of him. The demonstration was not about domination, but about voluntary partnership, and he was giving it freely. The silence from the Duke's faction was deafening. I caught a glimpse of Ilara's face, pale with shock and fury. The Duke's smile had vanished, replaced with a stony, furious mask. His gambit had failed spectacularly. He had meant to provide a beast that would expose me. Instead, he had given me a platform to showcase the very heart of my philosophy, and in doing so, had made me a legend. I stopped before the dais and bowed to the king. Samum stood quietly beside me, a golden statue of calm. Kalen rose. The look he gave me was not one of royal approval, but of pure, unguarded wonder. The Royal Equerry has once again proven that understanding is a bridge where force builds only walls. The stallion Samum is a magnificent addition to our royal herd, a testament to patience and respect. His gaze swept over the Duke. We thank you, Duke Silverwood, for your generous gift. The dismissal in his tone was exquisite. The Duke had been outmaneuvered, and the king had just declared me the victor in front of the entire pack. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excited talk, I led Samum back to his stall. The danger was past, but the cost of the victory was clear. I had not just gentled a wild horse, I had publicly humiliated one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. The Duke's cold, calculating eyes would now see me not as a nuisance, but as a true enemy to be eradicated. The web trembled again. A new, more powerful spider had just felt the sting of its own thread being pulled, and a cornered predator was always the most dangerous kind. Chapter 13. The Poisoned Apple. The triumph with Samum should have been a time of unalloyed victory. My position was inassailable. The king's favor shone on me like a second sun. In the stables, I was treated with reverence. Even the most stubborn of the old guard among the nobility now offered grudging nods of respect, though their eyes often remained cold. But a victory that creates a powerful enemy is a Pyrrhic one. Duke Silverwood did not rave or threaten. He
Took the bucket and sifted through the oats with my fingers. Half hidden amidst the grain were several small, wrinkled brown seeds. I plucked one out. My knowledge of herbs, honed in the archives and with the old herb woman, screamed the answer. Death's cap. A mushroom whose dried, ground seed could be easily hidden, tasteless and deadly in small doses. It caused paralysis of the heart. It was what had killed Bramble. A slightly smaller dose had stricken Daisy. And now they had targeted the king's own stallion, the symbol of our partnership. Rage, cold and clear, washed through me. This was not a political maneuver. This was murder. The murder of innocent, trusting creatures to strike at me, to break me, to show the king that my care was a vulnerability. I did not go to Kalen, not yet. Going to him would trigger a formal investigation, which would give the poisoner time to cover their tracks. This was a crime of the shadows, and it required an answer in kind. I assembled my small circle of the utterly trustworthy, Tomas, Alistair, my guard, and Patrice. In the privacy of my solar, I showed them the seed. They are targeting the horses to get to me, I said, my voice trembling not with fear but with fury. Bramble is dead. Daisy nearly died. Eclipse was next. It will not stop. We must tell the king, Tomas insisted, his face ashen. And say what? Patrice asked, her old eyes sharp. We have a seed. The vet will say it could have come from anywhere. The Duke's faction will call it an accident, or worse, blame Lyra's newfangled feeds. It will be her word against the silence of the palace. No, we need the hand that holds the poison. How? Alistair's voice was a low rumble. The stoic guard had become fiercely protective. A watch, I said, a secret one. The feed is now locked, but the poisoner found a way before. They will again. Tomas, you and your most loyal men must watch the feed room, the haylofts, the water troughs, in shifts, hidden. Alistair, you watch the comings and goings around the stables after dark. Patrice, listen in the servants' halls. The poisoner will have had to obtain the death's cap. Someone may have seen or heard something. It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. For 3 nights we watched. Nothing. The tension was a wire stretched to breaking. I checked every feed bucket myself, tasted the water, inspected every hay bale. I slept in fits, nightmares of still, cold horses haunting me. On the 4th night, the trap sprung. Alistair, hidden in the loft above the main stable aisle, saw a figure slip in just past midnight. Not a groom, a kitchen boy, one known to run errands for the Duke's household. The boy moved with nervous haste to the special feed bin where the mixed mash for the recovering Daisy was kept. He fumbled with a small pouch at his belt. Alistair dropped from the loft, silent as a ghost, and seized the boy's wrist. A struggle, a muffled cry, and it was over. In the boy's hand was a pouch containing more of the deadly brown seeds. We did not take him to the dungeons. We took him to an empty storage cellar. Tomas and Alistair stood guard. I faced the terrified boy, Patrice beside me with a lantern. Who gave you the seeds? My voice was calm, which seemed to frighten him more than shouting. I don't know what you mean. I was just checking the feed. You were poisoning an empty animal. This is Death's Cap. It kills. You killed old Bramble. You tried to kill Daisy. Who paid you? Who told you to do this? The boy, shaking violently, began to weep. I didn't know it would kill. He said it was just a laxative to make the horses sick, to make you look bad. He gave me silver, a lot of silver. Who? The Duke bowed, the movement stiff with suppressed fury. As you command, Your Majesty. He did not look at me as he left, but I felt the hatred radiating from him like heat from a forge. When we were alone, Kalen sank into a chair, the weight of the night's ugliness bowing his shoulders. He will never forgive this, Lyra. You have cost him everything. He will bide his time, but he will seek to destroy you. I know, I whispered, the adrenaline fading, leaving me cold and hollow. A sweet old pony was dead because of me. I am so sorry. About Bramble? This is not your fault, he said fiercely, looking up at me. This is the fault of small, cruel men who see kindness as weakness. You exposed them. You fought back with truth and courage. You saved Eclipse. You saved Daisy. He stood and came to me, and for the first time, he did not stop himself. He took my hands in his. They were warm, strong, grounding. Do not apologize for being the light that forces the cockroaches to scatter. The touch, the words, the shared victory and sorrow were almost too much. The wall between king and subject, between wolf and half-breed, felt paper thin in that quiet pre-dawn room. The poison had been meant to break me. Instead,
It had forged my inner circle into steel and had forced the king's hand against a powerful enemy. But as I left his chambers, the first gray light of dawn staining the sky, I knew Kaelin was right. The Duke was not defeated. He was wounded, humiliated, and waiting, and a wounded wolf was the most dangerous beast in the forest. The poisoned apple had been found, but the tree still stood, its roots deep and dark in the heart of the palace. Chapter 14. The Crack in the Crown. The execution of Garrow was a swift, somber affair at dawn, a warning to the court that the king's justice reached even into the shadows of noble households. The blood price was paid from the Duke's coffers, a financial sting that echoed through the Talus's financial ledgers. Duke Silverwood retreated to his country estates, a tactical withdrawal that felt more like a gathering of storm clouds than a defeat. The court, for a time, grew hushed, the factions recalibrating in the wake of the seismic shift. In the strange calm, my bond with Kaelin deepened into something both beautiful and terrifying. Our conversations in the stables or during evening walks in the frost-laced gardens were no longer just about horses or court politics. He spoke of his father's dreams for the kingdom, of his own frustrations with the ossified traditions that strangled progress. I shared memories of my mother, of her quiet human wisdom, of the feeling of belonging nowhere and yet finding a home in the heartbeat of a horse. We existed in a fragile, stolen world of understanding. His hand would brush mine when passing a tool. My shoulder would lean against his as we looked over a pasture wall. The air between us crackled with a tension that was both promise and peril. He was the Alpha King. I was a Royal Equerry of mixed breed. The gap between us was a chasm that love, for I could no longer deny the feeling blooming in my chest, could not bridge in the eyes of the world. It was a dream we dared not speak aloud, for to name it was to risk its destruction. The crack in our careful world came from the north. The skirmishes escalated into a full-scale raid. A border fortress fell, its garrison slaughtered. The message was clear. The rival Alpha, Sable, saw Silvercrest as weakened by internal strife, by a king distracted by a half-breed and her horses. War was no longer a specter, it was a guest at the gate. The council chamber became a war room. Maps were unfurled, troop counts tallied, supply lines drawn. The atmosphere was grim, the need for unity paramount, and in that need, Duke Silverwood returned. He arrived not as a chastened noble, but as a seasoned military commander, his earlier disgrace seemingly set aside for the greater good. He brought detailed intelligence on the northern passes, commitments from his bannermen, and a cold, ruthless strategy. He was indispensable, and he knew it. At a critical war council, as plans for the mustering of troops were finalized, the Duke made his move. It was not a direct attack, but a masterstroke of political poison. The unity of the pack is our greatest weapon. Our warriors must see their alpha focused, his strength undivided, his lineage secure. He paused, letting his words hang. It is past time, Your Majesty, that you took a queen, a union that solidifies alliances, that promises strong heirs, that shows the pack and our enemies that Silvercrest's future is certain. He had played his ultimate card, offering Ilara. It was a brilliant, brutal gambit. Refusing would alienate the Duke and his powerful allies on the eve of war, potentially fracturing the kingdom. Accepting would secure an alliance and publicly, permanently shatter whatever fragile hope lay between Kaelin and I. Every eye in the room turned to the king. I stood at the edge of the room, having been invited to speak on the logistics of cavalry mounts. I felt the walls closing in, the air turning to glass. Kalen's gaze found mine across the crowded room. In his storm-gray eyes, I saw a torrent of conflict. Duty, loyalty to his pack, fear of war, and a desperate, wild refusal. The moment stretched, the fate of a kingdom and two hearts balanced on a knife's edge. "The king's matter of a queen," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "is for the king to decide in his own time. Our focus now is the northern threat. We will not speak of this again until the enemy is repelled." It was a stalemate, a delay, but the blow had landed. The crack in my world widened into a crevasse. Ilara, watching from beside her father, allowed a small, victorious smile to touch her lips. She had won, not by confrontation, but by the inexorable pressure of tradition and war.
That night, I sought the only solace I had left. The stables were quiet, the horses sleeping. I went to Eclipse's stall and buried my face in his neck, the tears I had held back finally falling. "I am a fool," I whispered to him, "to dream of a king, to think my heart was my own to give." A soft footfall sounded behind me. I didn't need to turn. I knew his presence, the scent of pine and leather and kingly sorrow. "Lyra." His voice was raw. I wiped my face, not turning. "You should not be here, Your Majesty. It is not proper." "I don't care about proper." He stepped into the stall. Eclipse shifted, making room for him, accepting him as part of my herd. "What he said today was the truth," I finished, finally facing him. The torchlight showed the anguish etched on his face, mirroring my own. "You need that alliance. The pack needs stability. You must marry Ilara." He reached out, his fingers brushing away a stray tear on my cheek. The touch was electric, a brand of longing. "Is that what you want? For me to marry her?" "It doesn't matter what I want," the words burst from me, a choked cry. "What I want is a story for children, not for a kingdom at war. What I want," my voice broke, "what I want is you, and it is the one thing I can never have." The confession hung in the hay-scented air, naked and devastating. He pulled me into his arms then, crushing me against his chest. It was not a kiss, but something more profound, a shelter, an acknowledgement, a desperate clutching at a dream as it slipped away. I clung to him, my fists gripping the fabric of his tunic, breathing in the scent of him, memorizing the feel of his heartbeat against mine. "I will find a way," he murmured into my hair, his voice thick with a vow. "I don't know how, but I will not bend to this. I will not give you up to their politics and their poison." But we both heard the emptiness of the promise. The war, the Duke, the centuries of tradition, they were a tide too strong to hold back. We stood locked in that embrace, two souls clinging to a raft in a raging sea, knowing the dawn would bring the storm that would tear us apart. The crack was no longer in the crown, it was in our hearts, and from it only sorrow seemed destined to flow. Chapter 15. The Heart's True Kingdom. The army marched north within the week. The sight was both magnificent and dreadful. Columns of armored wolves, banners snapping in the cold wind, the rumble of wagons and the snorting of horse wars. Kaling rode at their head on argent, his war armor making him a figure of legend, his face set in grim lines. I stood on the palace walls with the rest of the household, watching them go. He did not look back. My world became a waiting room haunted by fear. Every dispatch from the front was torn open with trembling hands. News was sparse, grim, brutal clashes in the mountain passes, heavy losses on both sides.
The Duke, I heard, was proving a ruthless and effective field commander, his loyalty to the crown unquestionable in the heat of battle. His stock rose with every report. I threw myself into work to ward off the gnawing dread. The stables were quieter with so many horses gone to war. I focused on the pregnant mares, the young stock, treating the minor ailments of the palace mounts that remained. Simoom, the desert stallion, became my shadow, his quiet companionship a balm, but even his golden presence could not fill the Kalen-shaped void in my days. A moon cycle passed. Then a rider came not from the front, but from the Duke's southern estates. He bore a message, not for the king, but for Duchess Ilara. I would not have known, but Patrice, with her network of whispers, heard it from a maid. The Duke had secured a betrothal contract, signed by the acting council in the king's absence, citing the need for stability and the Duke's sterling war service. Ilara was to be formally presented as the crown's chosen bride upon the army's return, an acte accompli to cement the alliance and reward the Duke's loyalty. The news was a physical blow. He had done it. Silverwood had used the war to maneuver around Kalen, to make the marriage a political necessity so overwhelming that the king could not refuse without appearing ungrateful and destabilizing his own victory. My hope, that frail, stubborn flame, guttered and went out. The dream was over. The war would end, Kalen would return a hero, and he would marry Ilara. My place would be at the stables, watching from a distance as the man I loved built a life with another, bound by duty and the very salvation of his kingdom. I made my decision in the deep, silent hours of the night. I could not stay. To see it, to endure that daily agony would break me. I would take Simoom, who belonged to no one here but me, and I would leave. I would go somewhere the politics of wolves and the pain of impossible love could not find me. I packed a small bag with essentials, my mother's lullaby a dirge in my heart. I wrote 2 letters, one to Thomas, instructing him on the care of Eclipse and the others, one to Kalen. It contained only 3 lines. Forgive me. I cannot watch another claim the heart I see as my own. Be a great king. Yours, Lyra. As the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, I led Simoom from his stall. The palace was asleep. We moved like ghosts through the silent courtyards to a little-used postern gate. My hand was on the heavy iron bolt when a voice spoke from the shadows. "And where are you thinking you're going, girl?" Patrice stepped into the dim light, wrapped in a shawl, her old eyes fierce. "I have to leave," I said, my voice hollow. "Running away, after all you fought for, after all he sees in you? There is nothing left to fight for, Patrice. He will marry her. It is done." "Nothing is done until the king says it is," she snapped, her voice a harsh whisper. "Have you so little faith in him, in what you share? He is fighting a war for his land. Will you not fight for your heart?" "How?" The word was a sob. "Against an army? Against a treaty? Against 1,000 years of tradition?" "With the weapon you have ever needed," she said, stepping closer. "The truth of who you are. Stay. Be here when he returns. Look him in the eye and let him see your heart. Let him make his choice, truly make it, with you here. Do not steal that from him. Do not make him live with the ghost of your what if."
Her words struck a chord deeper than my despair. She was right. Running was a betrayal. Of him, of the trust we'd built, of my own courage. I had faced down stallions and dukes and poison. Could I not face my own heartbreak with dignity? I let go of the bolt. The letters in my pocket felt like ashes. 2 days later, the victorious army returned. They came not in the grim silence of departure, but with horns blaring and cheers echoing from the walls. They had broken the northern threat, sending Alpha Sable's forces reeling back across the border.
But victory had a price. The columns were shorter, many bearing wounds, all bearing the exhaustion of brutal combat. At their head, Calin rode, but not on Argent. He rode Eclipse. The great black stallion marched with a proud, weary dignity, his coat dusty but unharmed. And the king, he looked older, harder, his eyes scanning the cheering crowds not with triumph, but with a profound, weary scrutiny. The formal welcome began on the palace steps. The Duke stood prominently, Alara beside him, radiant in silver and blue, the picture of a future queen. Speeches were made, heroes acknowledged. The Duke was lavishly praised for his strategy and valor. Then Calin spoke. His voice, though tired, carried over the throng. "We have won peace with our claws and our courage, but a kingdom is not built on battlefields alone. It is built in the hearts of its people, on the principles we uphold when the swords are sheathed." His gaze swept over the nobles, lingering on the Duke, then moving past Alara, searching, until it found me. I stood at the edge of the crowd, in my simple equerry's clothes, Simoom at my shoulder. Our eyes locked. In that moment, the cheers, the Duke, Alara, all of it faded to a distant hum. There was only the silent, screaming truth passing between us across the sea of people. He stepped down from Eclipse, handing the reins to a groom. He began to walk, not toward the palace, not toward the waiting duchess, but through the crowd. It parted before him, a wave of confusion rippling in his wake. He stopped before me. The entire courtyard held its breath. The Duke's face was a thundercloud. Ilara's smile had frozen into a rictus of horror. Calin looked at me, his eyes holding all the battles, all the quiet nights, all the unspoken words. Then he did not bow, he did not take my hand. He went down on one knee. A collective gasp, like the wind being sucked from the world, echoed off the stones. "Lyra Ashwood," he said, his voice clear and strong, meant for all to hear. "You saw the pain in a creature everyone feared, and you offered kindness. You saw corruption in the highest places, and you offered truth. You faced hatred and poison with unwavering courage. You have shown me that strength is not in the tooth and claw alone, but in the gentle hand, the listening ear, the loyal heart." Tears streamed down my face, silent and unchecked. "I have fought for my kingdom," he continued, his own voice growing thick, "and now I fight for my heart. I do not offer you a crown out of political strategy. I offer you my heart, my partnership, my future, because without you, the victory is empty, and the kingdom has no soul. Will you stand with me, not as a subject, but as my equal, as my queen?" The silence was absolute. The world had stopped. All the impossible dreams, the whispered hopes, the pain of parting, they coalesced into this single earth-shattering moment. I looked at the king kneeling in the dust, at the Duke's fury, at Alara's shattered pride. I thought of my mother, who believed in compassion. I thought of Eclipse, who had bowed to trust. I thought of my own lonely, steadfast heart. My voice, when it came, was soft, but it carried on the breathless air. "I have nothing to bring you, no army, no lineage, no noble blood." "You bring everything," he said, his eyes shining. "You bring the only thing that matters, you." And in that moment, I chose not just him, but myself, the self I had built from straw and song and stubborn courage. "Yes," I said. "Yes, Calin, I will stand with you, always." He rose and took my face in his hands, and there, before his pack, before his court, before the gods and the wide sky, he kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise, of sealing a pact written not on parchment, but in shared trials and unbreakable trust. The storm of reaction broke then, cheers from the common folk who saw a story from their own dreams, shocked murmurs from the nobles, a cry of outrage from the Duke that was swiftly silenced by the guards now loyal only to their king's choice. It was not the end of the struggle. The Duke's faction would rage, traditions would scream, the path would be steep and thorny. But as Kalen wrapped his arm around me, turning us to face his people, I knew the foundation was unshakable. We had faced demons within and without, and we had chosen each other, not in spite of who we were, but because of it. He was the alpha king who valued a gentle hand. I was the half-breed stable girl who had tamed his fiercest stallion, and in doing so had claimed a king's heart. Our story was not of magic or fate, but of two souls recognizing a missing piece in the other and having the courage to forge a new whole. As the sunset painted the palace in gold and crimson, I stood with my hand in his, Eclipse and Samum standing proud behind us, a living testament to our journey. The kingdom stretched before us, its future uncharted, its challenges many, but we would face them together, a king and his queen, rulers of a heart's true kingdom, built not on fear, but on the unbreakable bond of a whispered trust and a love that bowed to nothing.